A picture in a storage chamber at Windsor Castle was left in the dark for 25 years. Two members of that family walked it back out into the light last week. William was assisted by Princess Anne in completing a project that had been under construction for 25 years. And Camilla was left standing there utterly stunned by the terrible and instantaneous fallout that occurred inside those walls. She ran immediately to Charles and demanded that he fix it, only to find that there was nothing she could do about it. However, it wasn't the portrait that shattered her. William created the scheme. Every institutional box that was checked and every legal step that was taken was made to be impossible to reverse. At the end, Anne did something that was completely outside of the plan. That struck Camilla more forcefully than the painting could, something that no one had planned or prepared for. When it was released, the nation was taken aback. According to what I gather, William was also taken aback. Stay with me. We'll get to it. Make sure you are subscribed before we continue, so you don't miss where this finishes up. A brief word before we delve further. My name is Harold. I spend my time observing everything that occurs in this family. The paperwork, the reports, and the records that were buried before anyone had a chance to ask questions. And what you are about to hear is not a news statement from the palace, but rather me piecing together the details as I read them. Stay tuned for the final 30 seconds of this narrative, which consists of 5 words said in a room with 2 ladies. So allow me to explain just what took place. William moved Princess Diana's official portrait to its proper location after removing it from the storage room where it had been kept for more than 20 years. Right next to Queen Elizabeth on the wall of the Hall of Matriarch at Windsor. The wall within Windsor dedicated to the women who truly shaped this monarchy is known as the Hall of Matriarchs, in case you haven't heard of it before. It is the residence's most revered ceremonial area. Camilla was unaware of its impending arrival. According to all accounts, she was utterly stunned when she saw it. She hurried over to Charles and told him to take it down right now. Charles's next move completely upended that palace. And since his response is the second most tragic aspect of this tale, I will address that as well. However, you must first comprehend the wound that lies beneath it all. Because without that, nothing that happened makes sense. The majority of people have never had a close-up look at a portrait of Princess Diana. Your stomach will plummet when you hear the tale of where the painting has been kept for the past 25 years. One of the most well-known times in her entire public life was when it was painted. She was at the pinnacle of everything. Her warmth, beauty, and ability to make common people feel loved and seen by someone who had no reason to notice them was something that no queen before her had ever accomplished. Diana reportedly stood in front of the completed painting for a considerable amount of time without saying anything, according to those there. That is a really particular form of silence, so give it some thought. That's what occurs to someone when something perfectly expresses who they are and they didn't anticipate it. The Hall of Matriarchs was the intended location for that portrait. Diana never noticed it hanging there. She passed away before it took place. As the world outside those walls continued to use her image on magazine covers, memorial stamps, and the front of every book about the modern monarchy, the portrait was discreetly taken out of consideration, wrapped, and placed in palace storage where it remained in the dark for more than 20 years. This is the point at which you must slow down, because the events that took place within that building in the days following her passing diverge greatly from the narrative that the nation was seeing on television. When Diana passed away on August 31st, 1997, there was widespread and public grief. The flowers outside the gates come to mind. You recall the throngs of people waiting there in the rain because they had nowhere else to go. It was quieter and, to be honest, more uglier on the other side of those gates. The initial calls from inside the palace within hours of her death being verified were not grief-related. For years, royal insiders have stated that one of the first questions asked during that time was if Diana had any crown jewelry in Paris. Someone was curious about the location of the property. Before the British public was even informed that their princess had vanished, The rush to recover it began. Camilla was already moving when that was happening. For years, Camilla had been the woman Charles secretly visited while he was married to someone else. Diana knew better than anybody else what this lady was doing to her marriage, and how skilled she was at it. So she referred to her in private as the Rottweiler. Now that Diana was gone, Camilla began exploring the palatial chambers that Diana had called home. She also didn't just move in. It's important to pause and consider the distinction here. Everyone moves in. Camilla deleted. Diana had kept fresh flowers in all of her living areas. She had made her own arrangements, since that was the kind of minor personal detail that mattered to her. Instead of replacing them, Camilla ordered them to be taken out and torched. Scorched. Throwing something out and lighting it on fire are two different things. Every employee in the home was aware of which task they were being requested to complete. Then there was the bedroom, where Diana had slept, where she had cuddled her boys, where she had written in private when no one else was around, and where she had sobbed by herself at night. Camilla gave the order to permanently lock that room. And because of what it says about her, I keep thinking about this particular detail. She wasn't interested in sleeping there herself. The room was completely useless to her. All she did was make sure that no one else would ever sleep in it. Instead of cleaning it, she wanted it covered up like something embarrassing, like a stain you conceal with furniture. Diana's personal belongings were packed and moved. Her image began to vanish from the royal house's most conspicuous ceremonial areas. And what makes it work is that it didn't happen all at once. No one ever got to their feet and declared that the images were going to be taken. A single frame relocated to a smaller space. Then one more went to a hallway. Then a third just vanished completely. And by the time anyone became aware of the pattern, there was nothing left to point at. That's how someone can be removed from a building without ever writing down a directive. You break it up into manageable chunks so that criticizing any one of them would make you appear irrational. Furthermore, her portrait was never included in the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor, the wall of honor dedicated to the women who constructed this structure. Because one woman found her presence unpleasant, the most adored royal woman of the modern age was absent from her own family's wall for more than 20 years. Heads of state from other countries passed by that wall. It was passed by prime ministers. At every family gathering in their adult life, her own sons passed by it, counted the faces, and knew exactly who was missing. Let me now introduce you to the boy involved in all of this, as he is directly responsible for everything that transpired last week. On September 6, 1997, William, then 15 years old, strolled through the streets of London behind his mother's coffin. His face was motionless as he strolled silently in front of the whole earth in a dark outfit. And people tend to forget that he was not a helpless youngster who was unaware of what had happened to his parents while he was marching behind the coffin. Diana had sat him down and told him personally, so even as a little child, he was aware that his father had been having an affair with another woman for years. There were 3 people in that marriage, she informed him. The family had broken up because of that, she claimed. If you recognize the remark, it's because she uttered a variation of it aloud during the Panorama interview in November 1995, and everyone in the nation heard it simultaneously with her sons. The way his younger brother learned about it was entirely different. To be honest, this is among the story's most depressing parts. Harry and his mother were watching a monarchy argument on television. He went to Diana and asked her who Camilla was as her name appeared on the screen. And in the middle of a show, Diana had to explain it to her youngest son, Liv, with no prior planning and no tactful way to do so. However, a chat was not the source of the most tragic information William would ever discover about what had been done to his mother. It originated in a letter. 2 years prior to her passing, in October 1995, Diana sent a letter to Lord Mishcon, her solicitor. She also said in that note that she thought her husband was preparing to kill her in a staged vehicle accident. She wrote about severe head injuries and braking failure. It would allow him to move on, she wrote. She claimed that Camilla was nothing more than a fake, and that the man was using her in every way possible. Diana passed away in a car accident in a Paris tunnel 2 years after she wrote those remarks. After she passed away, the message was given to the police, but it remained unread for 6 years until it was eventually delivered to Scotland Yard. 6 years. Take a moment to consider that, as it is the aspect of the entire narrative that I find impossible to ignore. A woman notes that she thinks her spouse is going to murder her in a car. She hands it over to her attorney. 2 years later, she passes away in an automobile. The note is sent to the police by the attorney, and it remains in a drawer for 6 years while the nation has inquests, publishes hypotheses, and debates seatbelt use. Those 6 years have never been satisfactorily described by anyone. As part of the subsequent investigation, Charles was eventually asked about it in private at St. James's Palace. Since many channels start trying to sell you anything at this point, I want to be honest with you. After examining the note and the crash, that investigation came to the conclusion that there was absolutely no proof of a conspiracy. I'm not here to tell you that Diana was correct in what she wrote. She authored it, I assure you. She was so terrified of the man she had married, I tell you, that she put it in writing and gave it to a lawyer. Her 15-year-old son ultimately grew up and read it. I can assure you. Keep an eye on what he does for the remainder of his life, since every choice he makes is influenced by that letter. For years, William and Harry were unaware of the entire contents of the note. When William turned around and saw what had been done to his mother's memories behind the palace walls after her death, something inside of him utterly hardened after he finally realized what his mother had been writing down in the latter 2 years of her life. Since then, it has never once softened. He observed Camilla navigating the rooms his mother had occupied. He saw his mother's portraits disappear from the walls. Every year, at every state event and family get-together, he saw the Hall of Matriarchs stand there with a void where Diana should have been. Every time he passed that wall in his life, he counted the faces. In public, he kept his face motionless, just as he had learned to do when he was 15. Anger was consuming him on the inside. He ultimately broke when he was 16. He grabbed someone close to him aside and suddenly let it all out. He claimed that Camilla clamped her claws down on his father and didn't let go for a single second. He said that his mother's death was due to Diana being forced to leave her own family, deprived of her safety, and pushed farther and farther until no one remained to support her. And she found herself in a Paris tunnel in the middle of the night, defenseless and alone. Those remarks were made by a 16-year-old boy regarding the woman who was living with his mother at the time. For the following 25 years, he carried all of them in silence and didn't repeat them to anyone who mattered. And that's the aspect of William that people tend to undervalue. And because he is so adept at being amiable in a receiving line, I believe they undervalue it. He figured out exactly what he believed had occurred to his mother when he was 16, and he hasn't reconsidered a single word of it since. At 16, he just realized something that most people never comprehend at all. Stating the truth at the wrong time only makes you feel good about yourself. At Christmas, he shook her hand. In pictures, he stood beside her. When the time came to publicly endorse her elevation on camera while maintaining a straight face, he did so. And he bided his time till the day he was able to take action. And he never once revealed it to her. However, William was not the only member of the family who carried a wound related to Camilla. There was another, and hers began long before Diana ever came into the picture and ran deeper than his. Princess Anne is that individual. Andrew Parker B.S. had a committed romantic relationship with Anne before to Camilla's marriage to him. It's not a fleeting issue or a rumor that someone made up later. They were so close that they were talking about getting married. But the royal family put an end to it. Andrew was a devout Catholic. Anne was not allowed to wed him since she was a senior member of the Church of England. She chose to step aside because she truly had no other option, and since she has always complied with the institution's requests. Camilla moved in shortly after Andrew proposed to her, and Anne witnessed their 1973 wedding from the pews. Take a moment to contemplate that picture, as it serves as the basis for all that followed. A young woman in her early 20s was sitting in a church, watching the man she had been discussing marrying someone else. She had been informed that she was not permitted to be the one standing up there and doing it in public. Wearing a hat, with photographers outside, and her face arranged in the exact expression the institution required of her. That afternoon, she sat through the service without making a scene. She has never made a scene about anything in her life. She attended the reception, and in 50 years, she has never publicly discussed the expense of that day. That's the woman in question. Not someone who gets angry easily. Someone who stores stuff in files? The lady who abducted him went on to spend the next few decades as a covert mistress, ruining Anne's brother's marriage, shattering Diana in front of everyone, and finally entering Buckingham Palace wearing a crown. For years, royal biographers have written that Camilla was terribly intimidated by Anne, that it was unsettling to be around Anne's coldness toward her, and that whatever was going on between those two ladies in 1973 would never be resolved. And since it's not shouting and it's not a quarrel that anyone could take pictures of, I believe it's important to be specific about what that actually means. After saying, "Good morning," the woman remains silent for the remainder of the day. It is being properly seated at every dinner for 50 years, without ever being addressed like family, at any of them. It is the particular coldness of someone who is never impolite enough to give you something to be upset about. According to reports, Anne addressed Camilla at a private luncheon following the coronation in May 2023, looked her in the eye, and told her that she was the king's wife, and not the queen. This statement has been repeated throughout the household ever since. It is said that Anne has never once bowed to her. According to legend, she personally requested permission from Queen Elizabeth to be exempt from that specific etiquette, and the Queen gave it without much protest. Anne witnessed Diana's erasure throughout it all. As she watched, the portrait vanished into storage. While the family released declarations about legacy and memory, she saw that wall remain vacant for 20 years, and she carried everything in the same manner as Anne does. It is permanently and silently, and never provides anyone with the pleasure of witnessing it. As a result, there were two members of that family who had been waiting a very long time to obtain the same thing for quite opposite reasons. They desired Diana's return to that wall. The night that ultimately marked the end of the waiting period then arrived. William had been planning this for years. Additionally, the preparation is what reveals the type of individual who will lead this nation. He didn't carry a painting under his arm and barged into a gallery. He met with curators to discuss the proper placing of portraits. In order to establish precedent for each step, he combed through the historical records of every prior placement on that wall dating back decades. He ensured that every institutional norm was strictly adhered to, making it impossible for anybody on the planet to legally contest or undo the painting once it was hanging. Within his own family, he had been engaged in a 20-year chess game. He had been preparing for this maneuver all along. I also discussed Anne's actions in the hallway outside the throne room in the most recent video on this channel. The nation watched the picture over breakfast the following morning as she walked. Catherine through those doors, crushing Camilla's last plea. Many of you asked me the same question in the comments section beneath it. You were curious about Anne and William's potential once they begin collaborating instead of working independently. William picked up the phone and called his aunt the night before it occurred, which is why this is the footage. It was a brief call. They had been waiting a very long time for the conversation to take place at all, and neither of them needed a lengthy one. Anne stated that she was eager to see her expression. It was long overdue, she remarked. Diana should return home, she added, and William replied that she will do so tomorrow. That was all. The call came to an end. In roughly 30 seconds, two persons in two different buildings who had spent decades keeping their faces expressionless in public spaces decided to do the one thing that no one in that household had ever dared to do. Camilla was unaware that any of this had occurred. She had thought she had won for 25 years. To be honest, why wouldn't she? The ring belonged to her. The title belonged to her. At Westminster, she was crowned. Additionally, she had that palace's walls set up precisely how she desired. All traces of the other woman were either behind a locked door or in a box. She was going to discover how mistaken she had been about everything. Allow me to take you into the evening that Diana returned home, as the preparations around it are very impressive. Camilla's engagement outside of London was organized for that day by the Williams team. That was neither fortunate nor a coincidence. In order to get her out of the building and keep her out of it until the entire thing was completed and totally irreversible, someone sat down with a diary and purposefully put her on a train out of the city. The Windsor Hall of Matriarchs was shuttered while she was away. To nearly everyone, but not to everyone. Only a few reliable employees were let entry. Individuals who had undergone personal screening, who knew exactly what they were going to be involved in, and who could be trusted not to answer the phone. The official royal diary contained nothing. No press statement was written, prepared, or kept on hand. There was absolutely no intention of telling anyone. You can tell that this was never about making a statement because it was taking place in complete silence. It was about finishing it. Princess Diana's image was brought into the Hall of Matriarchs early in the evening. It had been kept in storage for more than 20 years in protective wrapping, and the manner the crew handled it when they brought it in is a recurring theme among those who have recounted that night. They followed it gently. They moved with it in the same manner that you move with something that has once been harmed and does not deserve to be harmed once more. Princess Anne was also present, not communicating, not getting a report in return. She had insisted on managing the placement herself and would not allow anyone else to do it for her, which is why she was physically there in that room. I want you to keep this in mind. Here's the issue about that. She wasn't necessary to William's goal. It belonged to the curators. The protocol was approved. For months, the precedent had been examined and re-examined. Like everyone else, she could have remained precisely where she was and read about it in the morning. Nevertheless, she came. She was going to witness it firsthand after waiting 50 years. Slowly, the protective covering came off. Additionally, Diana's image was fully visible inside the walls of Windsor Castle, in the room where it had always been intended for the first time in almost 20 years. And because of who was in the room to witness it, I have given that moment a lot of thought. When it was younger, Anne recognized that face. Before Diana came, she was a member of the family. She witnessed the marriage, the wedding, the breakdown, and the funeral. And from just 4 feet away, she observed the entire arc of it. In front of a woman who was not even staring at a magazine cover or a national hero, that covering slipped off. She was staring at a girl who she had witnessed being ruined by the same organization she had dedicated her life to. The frame was ready. The position was measured, verified, and then measured once more. Because every inch counts on a wall like that, and everyone in the room was aware of it. And Diana's visage was on the wall within 90 minutes of that portrait being delivered to the gallery. She was positioned right next to the deceased Queen Elizabeth. 2 women standing next to each other, one who ruled for 70 years, and the other who never had the opportunity to reign. The exact spot where they ought to have been standing together from the start. When it was finished, the room became silent. No one spoke for a long, according to several persons who were present. They didn't offer each other congratulations. No one spoke. They gazed at a painting that shouldn't have left the shuttered gallery of an abandoned castle. Princess Anne then made a statement. She muttered it softly, almost to herself, the way people do when a thought has been on their minds for so long that it comes out whether or not they intended to. Employees close were able to hear it clearly enough to repeat it later. Diana belongs here, she remarked. She continued by saying that she always did. She doesn't deserve to be here. Not that it's time for someone to take action, is in the present tense, as if there had been an administrative mistake for the past 25 years that someone had just now had time to fix. That's it. That's the entire situation. There was no prepared message, address, or line for a press office. Just the truth said aloud by a woman who had spent her entire life remaining silent in a room that had been carefully silent about it for 25 years. And I want you to realize how much was truly being fixed in that room. Of all the royals in her generation, Diana was the most adored. Stadiums were packed with her. She lined the streets. At her funeral, she brought tears to everyone's eyes in a way that had never happened before and hasn't happened since. You recall precisely where you were standing if you were alive that week. Additionally, because one woman felt her presence intimidating, her own family kept her portrait locked in a storage room for more than 20 years. That night, that woman was asleep all across London. She didn't know. She was unaware that the wrapper had been removed. She was unaware that the frame had been raised, and that, just hours before, her stepson and sister-in-law had been standing in a gallery at Windsor, staring at a face that she had spent 25 years erasing from the structure. Now, since it didn't begin last week, you must comprehend how terrified Camilla had always been of this very moment. At Clarence's house, Camilla finally had a face-to-face encounter with William. She was trembling beforehand, according to a royal biographer, and she needed a drink to steady herself before entering the chamber. The idea of confronting a teenage lad was making her shudder. Over the years, many theories have been put forth, but the most straightforward one is typically the most accurate. She was fully aware of what she had done to his mother. She was aware that he was aware of it. And since there is no version of that exchange in which she emerges victorious, she had nothing to say in defense of him. Since William was 16, she had been terrified of him. However, she never once thought he would act in this way, that the kid who walked silently behind his mother's coffin would spend the next 25 years quietly, painstakingly, and patiently preparing for the one night when he would return his mother to the wall to which she had always been entitled, doing it with such care that no one could ever take her down again. Camilla returned from her engagement outside of London that evening. She slept in the palace that she had spent 25 years renovating, reorganizing, and purifying of the presence of another woman. While she slept, Diana peered out from the wall next to the Queen in the Hall of Matriarchs a few miles away. Camilla's worst day in decades was about to begin when she woke up the following morning. She was simply unaware of it at the time. When Camilla returned to Windsor the next morning, she anticipated an entirely typical day. A car, a schedule, a series of appointments. The typical. She entered. She reacted physically as soon as she heard the news. She failed to gather herself.